Good morning, Winterview, back again with another brief dialogue with dear friend Annastacey. Once again, this dialogue is being hosted en route to work in the front seat, driver's seat to be more specific, of my car. Hence the sounds of the revving engine, in particular going up a hill right now. This morning's dialogue is on surrender. Surrender is a perennially fascinating topic in spiritual circles, more so in Enlightenment / Non-duality dialogues, readings, literature, knowledge, etc. A very common part of the Enlightenment mythology, almost lost my words, is the idea of surrendering. And in particular, surrendering to a higher power, surrendering to God, surrendering to divine will, etc., etc. Can, the question begs, such a surrender take place? Does such a surrender occur in those who have crossed the gateless gate into the magical, blissful, golden light of love state where you eat candy all day and never get fat? State of enlightenment that we read about. Let's explore it. I have a sense that this brief dialogue might descend into a little bit of psychological technique, bearing in mind, as usual, that all techniques are for the imagined person. They will not get you enlightened. Indeed, you will never be enlightened. Just throwing that out there in case you had forgotten that. Alright, on with the show. To surrender. We know from hearing certain talkers, speakers, reading certain literature, that for some apparent individuals, the pathway seemingly, look at all these caveats I'm throwing in, seemingly, apparently, towards, again, apparently, towards enlightenment, has come after a period of great personal suffering at the hands of drugs and or alcohol addiction, or a whole range of addictions, possibly. And for those certain individuals, there was a point, it seemed, where they felt powerless against their addiction. And then, subsequently, at some mystical point in the future, had surrendered their will or surrendered their power to a greater divine something. And indeed, this, for those listeners out there who are familiar or vaguely familiar with the 12-step movement, this seems to be one of the core tenets of that fellowship / philosophy / process. So I thought we'd explore it a little bit. Why not? The idea, on the flip side, for the individual, of course, is that they, being an individual and separate from the totality, are an agent or have agency. In other words, they have the power to lead and direct their lives as they need. Now, this is a wonderful idea, and it feels fabulous when it feels like you're really making some hard choices, making some big decisions which pay off. But as I've said in a more recent dialogue, this idea is pure fantasy, and this can be challenged, or this can be verified, this fantasy, very quickly by just asking if you can do something right now as an agent. If you have the power to change, well then, just be happy. Just be amazing. Just give up that habit that you don't particularly like right now. You can do that, of course, because you're an individual agent with free will, a choice. As I sit here waiting patiently for you to do that, maybe I'll just continue with the dialogue. So, the idea then is that in drug and alcohol addiction, one has got themselves into a bit of a pickle with the old demon drink, and such cannot seem to give it up no matter what. And this could apply to any addiction, but what would happen generally is it's like a romance of sorts. The individual finds a happy honeymoon phase with the drink. We'll say, well, let's use drink, why not? And seems to enjoy it more or less. Has great nights out, has some great social experiences, if they have any social anxiety, which they usually do, they find that goes away on the drink, and they feel empowered in some way. They feel that life is actually pretty good. And for those of you who are partial to the odd tipple, you'll know that experience, a sort of feel good, warm in the belly, hail fellow well met reverie in pubs and drinking establishments that comes along with the drink. So there's many wonderful things that can be said of the lifestyle. Of course, the downside is that it's extremely unhealthy over the long term, and you end up with all sorts of problems. And then if it becomes proper alcoholism, the problems are compounded 2,000 million-fold when you get into debt, everyone leaves you, no one likes you, you become a pain in the bum, etc., etc. So the idea then for the poor, suffering alcoholic is that they must, at least as far as some thinking goes, surrender their will to a higher power. So this seems to overlap into the domain of spirituality, where the idea of surrender has a long and venerated history. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a big part of certain Buddhist philosophies too, to surrender, to let go. I think even the Force too. I think to become a Jedi Knight, one must surrender, or let go. Of what? I don't know. So, the mechanics therefore are quite interesting, because a lot of the individuals who have recovered from alcoholism will often report that there was a surrendering of some kind, or letting go of some kind, which begs the question, if there's no one there to do that, who or what surrendered? Good question. I think at the end it's as far as I've read, at least, because I don't have first-hand experience of drug and alcohol addiction, I'm ashamed to say, so I'm talking third-hand, that the idea in essence is that the sense of individual agency, the sense that I can do this, or the belief that I'm in charge of my life, is also commonly referred to, not necessarily correctly, but as the ego. And when one surrenders the idea that they are the agent of change in their life, or an agent of change in their life, they are in some way surrendering their ego. And this therefore, it seems, built into the mythology of enlightenment. So when one surrenders ego, one can become, or one is more likely to become, enlightened. But if we go back to a few dialogues prior, the sense of individuality is artificial. There is no separate entity. There is no, in effect, individual. So it's not that the individual surrenders. That would be impossible. There's no one there to surrender. So the question just sits there, like a turd in a punch bowl, one might say, begging the question, if surrender seems to occur prior to a spiritual shift of some kind, and there is a concomitant, oh God, I love that word, concomitant shift in one's drinking habits, patterns, then what's going on? It seems very powerfully that story, that narrative, suggests that if I surrender my ego, surrender the self-will, whatever you want to call it, positive things will change for me. I'll be able to quit alcohol and so forth. A very powerful part of the ego mythology, you could say. So let us look at the mechanics there in a little more depth. I'll give you my perspective on what's going on. As I just said, there's no question that you are going to surrender. The person cannot surrender anything. If anything, the person is surrendered. The person is let go of. But if there is no one there, then who or what does that? Mystery. And therefore, if there isn't anyone there, anything there that can do that, does it happen? Does it happen? Are we just describing something that is too mysterious to even put labels on? I suspect so. But because it's a brief dialogue and it's me, I'm going to stick labels on it and try and turn it into a process for the mind to chew on, have it make a bit of sense. Why? I don't know. Maybe it'll feel good to the mind. Alright, so the mechanics. If we look at going back to a few dialogues hence in the past, I talked about self-image, self-concept. I might have to do another refresher dialogue on that, but broadly speaking, in a nutshell, the self is an unstable conceptual entity, let's call it. Don't like that description particularly, but anyway, let's roll with it. And being unstable needs to be somehow supported, some sort of you got to bolster it somehow, and we ascribe therefore traits and characteristics to this person, positive ones obviously, because we want to be good, nice, wholesome people. And so we tend to partial out the negative, or the mind tends to partial out the negative. In fact, it just literally overlooks the negative and focuses on the positive for the individual. Now I know that's not true for all people. Some people sort of wallow in their negativity, but if you pick away at that, you'll find a narcissism lurking below the surface of sort of superiority of some kind. And in doing this sort of shadow emerges that I like to talk about sometimes, this shadow side, the side that we will never accept, never look at, so to speak. And in some ways you could say that the high you get from the alcohol or drugs can be supportive of that positive side of the individual that you'd like to focus on, the well-being side. And in a great way, a great dynamic as well, it brings up that, keeps flagging that shameful, addicted, awful, hidden part too. Concomitantly, no, I can't use that word there, I've overused it. Just thought I'd throw it out there because I like it. So, where was I? Got myself lost, got myself into a muddle. Oh yeah, so the individual who wants to, or the mind I should say, who likes to focus on the positive and avoid the negative, is, in some ways, what's interesting there, it recognizes, it's recognized that the individual, the self that it imagines, is part of a broad spectrum of characteristics, a very, very broad spectrum. So we know that when we focus on the positive and avoid the negative, we recognize in some ways there is a negative. And therefore there's a whole range of qualities that this self that we take ourselves to be could be, a whole range of negatives. And the core intoxication for the self is the aggrandizement of the self-concept. Okay, so a surrendering, therefore. Now we like the idea of the self being surrendered. But there's actually a much easier way, at least for the mind to sort of process, to surrender. You cannot surrender. The self cannot surrender the self. There's no question that's going to happen. But it can easily be examined with a bit of thought of what characteristics that the mind prefers, or the mind zooms in on and focuses and pretends that, oh, this is me, this is what I am. I'm a nice, wholesome, good-natured, sweet angel of light and love kind of quality. That's the mind very easily focuses in on that. But what it doesn't easily focus in on are the unpleasant and negative characteristics. So for drug and alcohol addiction or treatment of addiction, a very easy way to surrender, or thing to surrender if you're wondering, what can I surrender, is to surrender the self-concept. Or surrender, even more precisely, attachment to one's self-concept. Remembering that we've already recognized that the self is spectrumal, that is, it's part of a spectrum, so why not reclaim or own parts of the spectrum that are disowned, so to speak? The idea is that there's a lot of psychic energy going into the maintenance of the positive and shadow dichotomy, and to release that energy, to reclaim or own that shadow, releases a lot of that pent-up psychic energy. But the mind usually will reject it because of the sort of the consequence of doing that. Like, why would I want to own my shadow stuff? Because that would make me an awful person suddenly, immediately. So that right there, that doubt, or that I don't want to do that, is what is surrendered in the moment of surrender. It's, you know what? I can actually be everything, not just the positive, not just the negative for the people who like to wallow down in the negative and repress the positive. I can be the whole thing. I can be great and crap in equal measure. This is a wonderful revelation, that you can be all of those. Let's take the example of professional life, because that seems to be a great place for identity to be triggered. And we like to go to work and maintain this semblance of professionalism, this professional identity, which we hold up for 8 hours of the day, and then we get home and we go, oh God, thank God that's over. We strip off and smoke crack cocaine. No, I'm just kidding. So let's looking at the what would it be like at work to be equally competent and crap in equal measure at your profession, and to know that about yourself. Yeah, I can be both of those things in equal measure. The reluctance to do it is the holding, and the willingness to do it, you might say, is the surrender. Right there. That's the little core mechanism, you might say, maintaining the whole psychic bind. I just made that up, that expression, to fit this discussion. Right there. So what can be surrendered in your day today? Whatever. Like, maybe you've got the I'm sporty, energetic, fit thing going on. But can you be both? Can you be sporty, energetic, fit / also lazy, uninspired, unmotivated? Can I be creative, awesome, amazing, dull, unimaginative, boring? Can I be everything? Of course I can. Of course you can. That psychic energy can easily be released, because there's no... It's almost like if I release it, I suddenly recognize that there's no big bad judgment that's going to take place. That I'm not going to upset God for being everything. That I'm not going to be punished by the devil for owning my shadow. That I'm not inviting demons or negativity into my life. I'm owning, or I'm expressing, or I'm being all that I am. And so, even though this is more of a tokenistic thing, you could say, I'm recognizing the infinity of, or the isness in some ways of life. Anyway, there we are. Gave you a little spiritual technique, which will definitely make you enlightened if you follow it to the letter. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on the matter today. Thank you again for listening. I actually don't even know if this brief dialogue made much sense, but it's just what happened. That's what we could say. We could just write it off with a spiritual sort of phrase. Everything's okay because it happened. There we go. Just gave a license for relativism. Once again, comments are welcome. I think I've already said that. Repeating myself, probably need a coffee. Thanks for listening.